We're not talking about the best of them. We're just talking about the rest of them.
Not the worst parts, but the best parts. And the best parts we have. The best of the rest.
Hello, and Inspector Detector suspected foul play. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's live-action cartoon adaptation month, and this week we are talking the 2008 film Speed Racer. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Andrew Podcaster. You ready for this one, Andrew?
I am, Chris, yes.
What is your history with this film, Andrew? Did you see it in theaters? Have you watched it much since then? Has your opinion changed on it since the first time you viewed it?
I don't know that I saw this in theaters. I was actually kind of surprised watching it. I felt like there was huge chunks of this movie that I'd completely forgotten. So I know I watched it at one point. I think when it came out, I think the reception was kind of mixed. And Speed Racer was just not something I had a huge affinity for at the time. And I was just kind of like, all right, I feel like this is something I can kind of pass on and kind of pick up later. And just never really got back to it. So years and years ago, I finally did sit down and watch it. Because I had kind of heard people being like, I think it's underrated. I think it deserves a little bit more appreciation than it gets. And so I watched it, and I don't think it stuck with me particularly heavily. But I was excited to go back and again kind of reevaluate it and see for the show. So I don't have a whole lot of attachment or memories of this movie for the most part. It's just something that I'd kind of just seen it kind of slowly getting reevaluated over time. So I was definitely interested in going back and checking it out.
I personally had never seen this movie before until watching it this week for this podcast.
Wow.
Even though I love the Wachowskis. I talked about that a lot back on our Matrix month. I love those movies. Their post-Matrix filmography is very... I haven't seen a lot of it, including Speed Racer. But like you, I've heard all these retrospective opinions on this movie that the world wasn't ready for it. It's better than its reception. It's secretly a masterpiece. I mean, you just type in Speed Racer into Reddit and you will find post after post after post of people rediscovering this movie and praising it, people agreeing with them, and articles being published about how it was ahead of its time or misunderstood, just you name it. I mean, there's been a lot of reevaluating on this film, which had me very interested to go and check it out and see if, were critics wrong at the time? Was it misunderstood? What is actually going on here? And boy, I've got a lot to say. I've got a lot to talk about. And as far as the property itself, I mean, Speed Racer, I really don't know if I've ever watched the show. I mean, all month I've been talking about whether it's Flintstones or George of the Jungle. Even if you didn't watch these shows regularly, you knew them, you knew the theme song. And I mean that's true of Speed Racer. I'm aware of it, but even the theme, I was like, yeah, I think I know the theme song. And then I pulled it up on YouTube. I was like, no, this really doesn't sound familiar. I remember the words "Go Speed Racer."
Go Speed Racer. Go Speed Racer. Go.
That's all I kind of remember.
But
watching it, I was like, nah, I definitely did not grow up watching this. And I even forgot it's an anime. It's one of the earliest instances I can remember of people mocking the dub, the voice not syncing up with the lips, even though it's a cartoon.
Right.
Interesting. And speaking of which, this episode, I mean, we're covering this during live action cartoon adaptation month. Really, we could have covered Speed Racer back in our comic book movie days. The first
we could have
59 episodes of this podcast were all about comic book movies based on comics. And technically, this franchise was originally published as a manga back in 66. The anime came very quickly. I think the very next year it was already adapted into an anime. I think it's translated. The original name, the Japanese name being Mach Go Go Go, which is super fun. I think it still carries that title, but also I think Speed Racer's kind of become worldwide at this point. So I might say like Mach Go 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 Speed Racer over there now, but what a fun title. Mach Go Go Go. It's fun to say.
It is. There's a whole lot of Japanese television shows that have really fun names like that. But yeah, this one kind of came and hit big. Like you said, that manga is first published in June of 66, and the anime starts airing in April of 67. So less than a year from the publisher, from publishing to adaptation. That's, I'm trying to think of anything that's quicker, but nothing comes to mind.
I mean, Turtles was pretty fast. That's about
but not that fast. That was about 3 years, I think. First Mirage comics are 84. And I think that series hits in 87. So you're still right. 3 years is still, from a nothing comic to a Saturday morning cartoon, is massive.
Sure.
It's super quick. But there might be other Japanese shows that have done the exact same thing for all I know. I know there's lots of long-running manga over there about everything that you can imagine. I know there's tennis manga. I know there's boxing manga. There's almost anything you can imagine. Kenny Omega actually talked about how the first reason he learned Japanese was so that he could stay more current with the boxing manga Hajime no Ippo, and then became one of the greatest wrestlers in all Japan. But yeah, it's a wild thing. Like I said, this could have been covered during our comic book month.
Comic book month, Andrew?
Comic book month? Years. But what I find so interesting about Speed Racer is that there's not that much of it. I think that's kind of what I think is the most interesting part to me, is that the anime is one season of 52 episodes, which, 52 episodes is it's no slouch run, but like an animated show, that was not uncommon to be your whole series. That's it. It does not get more after that. And the original manga is listed as having 2 volumes.
Wow.
Now, I used to have a collection. It was 2 bigger volumes. Don't misunderstand me. But, and I'm sure those are like reprinted, like bound collections. But very interesting. Then there's been a couple of things later. There's been a couple of animes that have come later. I think 97. There was a little bit of a revival. But very interesting to me that for the legacy that Speed Racer has, how little content there actually is, relatively speaking.
Well, Andrew, let's talk about, I guess you could call this a bit of a revival back in 2008 when this movie comes out. Speed Racer, they make a live action film. Boy, there's a lot to say. Let's set the stage a little bit. The movie is released May 9th of 2008, and it's made on a budget of $120 million. That is a huge budget for any movie, but especially one adapting a 60s television show. At the box office, it only brings in $94 million. Way below that production budget. And that's not even talking about marketing. This movie was heavily marketed. So the studio lost quite a bit on this film. Critically, not well received. It holds a 41% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. Audiences, as we've alluded to, that score is a little bit higher. It's sitting at 60%. That's in the fresh category on the audience side. This movie, it's beyond having its defenders. It's a straight up cult following at this point.
Yeah, I mean, this is a cult classic as far as many people are concerned. I have friends that, I don't mean this backhandedly, unironically say this is their favorite Wachowski movie. For a variety of reasons. And so, I mean, this has definitely struck a chord with people. I think it has definitely caught on in some ways later that it definitely didn't at the time, or maybe it did at the time. But yeah, I would say at this point, it's got a full-on cult following.
The movie is both written and directed by the Wachowskis. And this is the first film that they write and direct since the Matrix trilogy. This is their follow-up to the huge franchise that is the Matrix. They go to Speed Racer. V for Vendetta does come out in between. They do write that. They adapt it from the comic. They do not direct it, though. I mean, there's like an urban legend out there that they secretly directed it. I'm not going to get into all that, but they're not credited as directors on that film. This is the first movie they're credited as both writers and directors. And I don't think anyone saw that coming. This would be their big follow-up.
I mean, it's how it is sometimes. I mean, I want to say that Ang Lee's follow-up to Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon was Hulk. I mean, that's you get these weird situations. And yeah, V for Vendetta is a weird one because people are like, it's a Wachowski film, like in all but name, because James McTeague directs that. And he was a second assistant director on Great Many Films and was the first assistant director on The Matrix. So he kind of had this working relationship with the Wachowskis that continue through the rest of those sequels. So when they were kind of looking at doing V for Vendetta, the Wachowskis seemingly kind of, I don't know if they kind of chose him or they nudged the studio in that direction, but it definitely gets that kind of air where people are like, this is based, I mean, it's the Wachowskis' first assistant director from The Matrix directing a movie based off a script that the Wachowskis adapted from that comic. So there's a lot of DNA there, but I don't really buy into the whole, like, they ghost directed it. They could have just directed it if they wanted to. Like, there's no
right. Why would they not want to be credited?
There's no reason to be secret about that. But
it's kind of like Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas, not written or directed by Tim Burton. But you watch the movie and you're like, yeah, this is a Tim Burton movie. I mean, this is clearly based on his concept and his artwork. So, it's kind of a blurry line.
Yeah, and so, that's, like I said, this is a 5-year gap. Obviously, they spent some time working on V for Vendetta. You don't write that script, and that takes time. But yeah, you make that movie where you make the studio a whole bunch of money, and then the kind of passion project that follows is sometimes, it's not uncommon. You get directors that make that big, bombastic blockbuster movie for a studio that makes them tons of money. Although ironically for the Wachowskis, The Matrix was kind of their thing. So they got to make their big sci-fi trilogy and then got to follow it up with the passion project that they also wanted to make, Speed Racer. And so it's a weird journey. And obviously we've talked about the Wachowskis a great deal. They were not the first people brought onto this project. This is another one of those movies that kind of languished for like a decade plus before it finally kind of found its way to cameras. I mean, there was stories about this back in like 92, and talked about like Johnny Depp being cast as Speed Racer, Henry Rollins as Racer X.
I mean, that sounds cool. I'm not gonna lie.
Julian Temple was going to direct it at one point, and then he left, and that meant Depp also left. Gus Van Sant was considered for it. Alfonso Cuarón apparently was attached for a minute. Tons of different screenwriters, including like J.J. Abrams, all took passes at it. And then kind of early 2000s, the hype kind of gets going again. They were going to get a music video director named Hype Williams to kind of do it. Lauren Schuler Donner was kind of behind it. A couple of different screenwriters. And then even in 2004, apparently, I didn't think he had this kind of sway in 2004, but Vince Vaughn apparently like spearheaded a revival attempt in 2004. And then Vaughn was cast as Racer X, and was going to executive produce. And then production kind of never spun up and he left the project. But what a world. Vince Vaughn's Speed Racer coming in summer of 2005. But so October 2006, that's when the Wachowskis finally kind of get brought on. But like I said, a huge, long path. That's 14 years between the original studio kind of talking about it and it actually kind of getting brought to life. So I mean, that's a massive time frame. And the obviously the Wachowskis kind of started from scratch. They didn't use anything that came before, and deservedly so. They're going to make it their own thing.
I love the idea of 90s Gus Van Sant directing Speed Racer. I'm just
Good Will
picturing like
Hunting
this
into Speed Racer.
I'm picturing like a long tracking shot of Speed Racer walking to his car. Then he gets in and he drives off, but the camera never leaves the starting position. You see him at a distance go around the track. You're really, really artsy stuff there, Andrew.
I want to see it now. I imagine the shot is literally the camera at the starting line, and it stays there the whole time Speed is running the track, and you just see nothing for like whole minutes, and then he finally pulls up, and that's how you know he's finished the race, because it finally came all the way back around.
He kind of mumbles something, but you can't hear it very well, but that's the intention.
Yeah. What did he say? That's the question. That's the mystery of Gus Van Sant's Speed Racer. What were his final words on the track, Chris?
Go, go. All right, well, let's talk about the Speed Racer that we did get, Andrew. The Wachowskis Speed Racer. It was a bonkers movie. I've used that word to describe a lot of movies. Maybe never more appropriate than this one. This is a bonkers film. Andrew, are you ready to jump into it?
I am.
Speed Racer comes from a family of race car drivers and racing enthusiasts. Despite his older brother Rex perishing during a race, Speed follows in his footsteps and dreams of racing in the Grand Prix. After turning down an offer to race for Royalton Industries, the leading race team in the world, Speed has a target placed on his back and finds himself in more and more dangerous scenarios on the track. His quest to make it to the Grand Prix eventually leads him to the Casa Cristo 5000, the very track that his brother died on. Teaming with his girlfriend Trixie and the mysterious Racer X, Speed finishes the race and does land a spot in the Grand Prix. If Speed Racer can come out on top of what he knows to be a fixed race, he can change the game forever. Andrew, I left a lot of things out of that premise because we've got a podcast to record here. There is so many side plots and characters in this movie.
Yes.
Look, it's like it's well written and coherent, but it is a lot to keep up with.
It is. It is not a lean movie, that is for sure. There is a lot going on here. There are a great many characters. There is tons of massive race set pieces. There is a lot going on here, and obviously we'll talk more about things as we kind of go through the movie. But yeah, it is not a like I said, not lean here.
Before we get to those scenes and jump into all that, we got to talk about the performances in this movie. The cast, starting with the best casting, the best performance of the film, because every episode we recognize one person who goes above and beyond the call of duty, that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance. And we recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. So, Andrew, kick us off here. Who is getting your Mark Strong Award for Speed Racer?
Great question, Chris. I
didn't see that coming. Wow, what a great interview.
Wow, what a fair question. But I'm gonna go with I guess essentially he's our villain of the piece. Is not originally seen that way, but he is revealed to be as such throughout the course of the film. But I'm going with Roger Allam as E.P. Arnold Royalton, the kind of corrupt owner and CEO of Royalton Industries. He's introduced pretty early on in the film as kind of somebody that seems to be wanting to take Speed Racer under his wing and kind of get him to that next stage of racing and stardom, and kind of really tries to push him there. Comes off very genuine, presents himself as a self-made man, except no billionaire is self-made, folks. But he has this fantastic factory. He's kind of got these lavish praises. He love bombs them extremely with all the gifts and the stuff. But the idea is that he wants them to race for him, and kind of your typical, he's presented very much as kind of trying to get it, but you can tell there's something a little weird about this guy. And after Speed thinks about it for a little while, he kind of turns on him, and we get this really cartoonish villain performance, which is, I'm absolutely certain, the intention here. And he's just like, if this dude had a Snidely Whiplash mustache, he would be like twirling it in every scene, just because he's that kind of villain. But he's leaning into it at every turn. He's doing a really good job at just being a deeply unlikable character. As the film goes on, he creates these more and more elaborate kind of scenarios trying to get Speed Racer taken out, culminating in the final race where he's like, I will offer $1 million to whoever takes out Speed Racer, because he's in on this whole fixing scheme, it turns out. That's kind of his thing. He's part of that. And he stresses the Speed Racer that, you just don't get it. This is how it is. And Speed Racer winning kind of undoes this whole system that Royalton and his associates have set up over the years. And he's just a great villain. He works perfectly as a foil to all of this. Towards the end of the film, as Speed is doing well in the race, he just becomes increasingly more and more unhinged, culminating in him throwing this like giant ice sculpture of a race car down to the ground. And I'm just like, yep, this is exactly what this movie needs. A cartoonish, over-the-top villain. There's so many aspects of this movie that are very much trying to recreate that frenetic sense of the cartoon, and to have that kind of carry over into a villain performance that is just up to that measure as well, I think helps the film immensely. And Roger Allam is up to the task. Just recently also saw him in the film Tetris, where he plays Robert Maxwell, as Wikipedia describes him, a Czechoslovak-born British media proprietor, member of parliament, suspected spy, and fraudster. Which is about as great a byline as it gets for you, I imagine. And he has that character. Robert Maxwell obviously had a role to play in the rights dispute regarding Tetris. But Roger Allam, I think, doing a great job here as our villain. I'm giving him my mark strong. Good stuff.
So Tetris, recommend. I've not watched this movie yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Thumbs up.
Yeah,
I have watched the feature-length documentary on the YouTube channel, The Gaming Historian, about the creation of Tetris, and it is a very interesting tale. So I can imagine that a movie based on that story would also be very interesting. So I do want to get around to it, but I do recommend that documentary as well, free on YouTube. Check it out. Great pick for Mark Strong, though. I agree. Great villain. Just appropriately over the top, especially, like I said, as the movie goes on. The scene that comes to mind as soon as he said he's a Mark Strong Award winner is whenever he's trying to get Speed to sign on with his team.
Yeah.
And at first he's just trying to woo him and show him how much money they put behind him and his facilities and the cars. And he's like, all right, go ahead and sign. And Speed, he doesn't even say no yet, but he's just hesitating. And he just can't help it. He's just like, he kind of spills everything. He's like, look, this is a nasty, gross, corrupt business. It's the way it's always been. You're a cog in the machine. I'm giving you just a chance to be part of it. Don't be an idiot. This is the best deal you're ever getting. Sign it. Like, he's not even trying to schmooze him anymore.
Yeah.
He just kind of lays it out there, and he thinks that he's so powerful that Speed will have no choice but to sign with him. And Speed sticks to his values and his morals and doesn't sign, and then we have the conflict going out the rest of the movie. But just the smugness to think you can just reveal all that and they would play into your hand really says a lot about his character. And once that mask is off, he's just nasty the rest of the movie. Great pick, Andrew. Not surprised you love your villains, especially whenever they go this over the top. So not surprised, but definitely a worthy recipient of the Mark Strong Award. My Mark Strong Award is going to go to someone else. I was debating between a couple of performances, and then sitting here thinking about it, I've got to go with my gut. I've got to go with John Goodman as Pops Racer. And
I love that Racer is the family name. I can't. His name is actually Speed Racer in this movie. His parents named him Speed.
What I love is I was pulling the cast list from Wikipedia, and it says John Goodman as Pops Racer, Speed's dad. Like, I know his name is Pops Racer.
Pops Racer. Who else's dad is he?
Yeah, very good. But I mean, someone else I was considering, or we're going to talk about him and give them their flowers, but I almost like take John Goodman for granted because he's just been on fire for like 3 decades now. He's great in everything that he's in, whether it is voice performances. If we watched The Emperor's New Groove earlier this year, fantastic there. He's so good at being like endearing and sweet. And there's a lot of shades to Pops, and sometimes he's pretty gruff, but like there's plenty of very much endearing scenes. And the father-son stuff in this movie is the heart of the film, and it totally works for me, and it plays into a lot of my favorite scenes. And you've got to credit John Goodman with that. And it's almost like I said, I almost overlooked him because I'm like, yeah, well, it's John Goodman. He's great. He's killing it. But like, we've got to stop and recognize that sometimes. We've got to reward that. We've got to recognize that, like, just because we expect them to be great doesn't mean we shouldn't recognize them for being so damn good. And I mean, his career is just so versatile. I mean, like, his role in The Big Lebowski is nothing like this. It's nothing like 10 Cloverfield Lane. You know, like he can do anything, and he truly, any movie he's in, he makes it better. If you were to, you know, if we covered his entire filmography, he'd be winning a lot of Mark Strong awards. He elevates every movie that he's in, this one included. So John Goodman, Mark Strong Award.
Fantastic choice. If you want an example of that range / whatever, literally right now, go watch an episode of The Conners and then go watch an episode of The Righteous Gemstones. Like, he is playing in one show, he's the sitcom dad, and he's very good at it. It's what brought him to the table back in the day. He's great at it. And then you watch The Righteous Gemstones, where he plays this Southern megachurch preacher, and it's just it's about as polar opposite as it gets, and he crushes both of them. Like you said, if you go through his filmography, he's got tons of Mark Strongs. I'm going to say it out loud. He might be the Mark Strong of Big Lebowski.
Wow.
He might be. He might be. There's a lot of good performances in that movie, but I feel like he might take that one. I mean, Jeff Bridges, I think, is his only real competition, but he's really good in Big Lebowski, which again, completely different from everything else. Like you said, almost he's got this insane range, and like you said, you take him for granted. People like are just like, oh, John Goodman. He's kind of like your dad. Like, you're just kind of like, there's John Goodman. Good to see him. Like, it's kind of like you said, it's easy to kind of forget that he's so good. Like, you even go back to like his early Coen Brothers stuff with like Barton Fink or Oh Brother Where Art Thou, all that stuff. Even looking beyond the Big Lebowski with the Coen Brothers and stuff, it's a great career. And I mean, in this movie, you get to see John Goodman fighting ninjas. I mean, how are you gonna have a bad time with that? Or should I say nanjas? And
he doesn't fight them; he wrestles them, Andrew.
He beats them up and then throws them out a window. It is fantastic. It's great. I had somehow forgotten that John Goodman fought ninjas in this movie, so that was a wonderful delight. Obviously, John Goodman, an alum of literally this month on the show.
Right.
But and you know, we talked about him then, but just he's so good in everything he does. He's great here. And so I'm glad now we've righted the universe, given John Goodman and Mark Strong. And it's a great performance. It really does, like you said, it's got a lot of layers to it. Like, there's some scenes where he's not a villain, but him and Speed are definitely at odds with each other. And you can tell there's some anger there that he's trying to appropriately channel into ways to better his community. And it's then other times you can just see the familial relationship, especially as we get further on in the movie, and they kind of both kind of open up on the things that they're not being open about. And it's great. I think it's fantastic. So I'm glad to add John Goodman to this illustrious hall.
The Hall of Strong. Let's talk about the lead of this film, Speed Racer himself, brought to life by Emil Hirsch. Look, it is near perfect casting, I think. I mean, he somehow looks like the animated Speed Racer, and I think he nails it. I'm trying not to sound backhanded here, but like, one reason I'm not going, say giving him a Mark Strong award or anything is because the character's kind of he's almost just like just an idea of like goodness and righteousness, which is respectable and appropriate for a hero, but not particularly.
Oh, he's Superman.
Well, okay, sure, a bit like Superman, but just not particularly relatable, and not like he doesn't have like the cool quips we're gonna remember. He doesn't
Right.
have those over the top moments. I mean, his driving certainly does, but I think he's playing the part perfectly. I think it's just written in such a way where like this isn't the breakout character or standout character, despite the movie being called Speed Racer. Does that make sense? I hope it doesn't sound too negative, because I really think Emil Hirsch is doing a great job, but it's just written in a way where it's Andrew, save me here. What do you think about this character?
I think I think you're kind of stumbling over your words, but I think it's mostly on task, and it's not meant backhandedly. The character is, there's obviously like a tragedy there. He misses his brother. He kind of has that tension with his father over that situation. But by and large, he's kind of just a conduit for adventure. And that's, like I said, I don't mean that backhandedly. Like, that was the golden age of superheroes. That happened a lot. Like, characters were really just the cipher the story kind of used to move the story along. The characters themselves didn't get a whole lot of focus. And so with Speed, you do get some development, but overall, there's not a whole lot. Speed is kind of Speed the whole movie. There is a realization at the end that he kind of gets the advice from Racer X, and he kind of does have that big moment that it kind of all clicks together for him. He kind of has that moment where he's like, it needs to be about me, not the rest of it. But other than that, there's segments where like Speed is kind of, like I said, he's Speed Racer for most of this movie. There's not a lot of growth because he doesn't really need a lot of growth. So I do get what you're saying. I think it is accurate. It is not meant backhandedly. It's just how they're choosing to play the character. And I don't think that's an incorrect way to do it. I think in the original cartoon, that would not be a inaccurate description of how Speed is in several episodes.
I think the first time I probably saw Emil Hirsch was in The Girl Next Door, a teen comedy from 2004. But at this period, when Speed Racer is coming out, I mean, he is on fire. The year before, 2007, he makes Into the Wild, where it's just insanely critically acclaimed, his performance specifically, and rightfully so. That is a movie that I watched, I enjoyed, I was very impressed with his performance. It's one of those movies, though, I might never watch again, but it's interesting because I watched that movie, and at the end of it, credits hit, I'm like, I am very sad. That was, I won't do any spoilers, but I felt like it was a tragic tale. My older brother loves that movie. It's one of his favorites, and he finds it incredibly inspiring, and it's just a totally different takeaway from the same material, and that's one of the most interesting things about art, just two people looking at the same thing and coming away feeling totally differently about it. But yeah, Into the Wild, like I said, he deserves that praise. Makes Speed Racer, which, yeah, the movie bombed, but it's a huge Hollywood film. And the same year is also in Milk, which another critically acclaimed film.
Yeah, Into the Wild there's a lot of stories I would use. There's a lot of words I would use to describe Into the Wild. I don't know if inspiring is one of them, but obviously that's based off the nonfiction book of the same name by John Krakauer. Great writer, has written some tremendous books. Under the Banner of Heaven, Into Thin Air, which was the basis of the film Everest, of which he is actually a character in the film. He apparently wasn't super happy with how Everest turned out, but hard to go wrong with John Krakauer books, especially his early stuff. It was very well thought out and touching on weird things you'd never heard about. Stuff like Christopher McCandless and his weird journey that he took. But yeah, I mean, after that, he was everywhere there for a while. I remember Speed Racer Milk. I saw him in Taking Woodstock. He's actually in a movie I really, really like called Killer Joe. This is again, as Wikipedia describes it, a 2011 American Southern Gothic black comedy crime psychological thriller. Directed.
Oh yeah, one of those.
Directed by William Friedkin, who obviously known for directing a little indie flick called The Exorcist, and also The French Connection. But it was a late-stage film by him in 2011, written by Tracy Letts, adapted off his play of the same name, but starring Matthew McConaughey and Emile Hirsch, Juno Temple, Gina Gershon, and also alum of the show, Thomas Hayden Church. Great little film. I recommend it to anybody, but also a little messed up. But yeah, I think he looks the part, definitely. I think he's a great pick for Speed Racer. I know this was another one where they talked about like 47 different people that were apparently in talks for it. Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Shia LaBeouf, Zac Efron, all of which would have been various levels of good to great. Zac Efron, I think, also definitely. I mean, Zac Efron kind of looks like a cartoon brought to life, so it really
Yeah.
he like has that jaw. He would have been fine, but it's I think it's exactly what the movie is calling for, and I think he does a good job with it.
Emile Hirsch also has a music career, which I was not aware of until we were getting ready for this podcast, but he releases music simply as Hirsch, and I was listening to some of his music while I was getting my notes together. Good stuff. I think I'll listen to some more. I enjoyed it.
Nice. Hirsch definitely sounds like an early 2000s like type band. Like, dude, Hirsch is going to be in town this weekend. Sweet.
Drop Emile, just Hirsch. It's cleaner.
Cleaner.
I do want to shout out Nicholas Elia, who plays the young Speed Racer. Not in a ton of scenes, but definitely several flashbacks and our intro to this movie. But in particular, whenever his older brother dies, there's this scene of young Speed Racer just crying into his mom's arms that lasts long enough that it affects me. Like, it's like, I don't know, 10 minutes in this movie maybe, but I'm like, man, that is some raw emotion. So good job, young Nicholas. Speaking of alums from the show from this very month, Mark Strong Award winner Christina Ricci is in this film as Trixie. We also get to talk about her back during Matrix month, where she rejoined with the Wachowskis for the Matrix Resurrections. I love her here as Trixie. Another person, distinct look, distinct facial structure, looks like a cartoon brought to life, especially with the haircut that they give her here. So I think the look is spot on. I love the voice she's doing, because it's not like an accent, but it's just like it's if a pop art character came to life. It's how they would talk. She somehow nailed that voice and speaking pattern. And of course, I love that she is the love interest of Speed Racer, but she gets in on the action. She coaches him through. She's like his spotter through one race, and then she gets on the track herself later. So getting in on the action, I always love to see it. And Christina Ricci, we've praised her a ton already on this podcast. She's great.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a big standout on our Casper episode, but yeah, she's got a like you said, she's Speed Racer's girlfriend, and there's definitely plenty of scenes where she's just kind of along for the ride, and that would have been kind of bummer, but then she does get to get in on the racing and the fighting and all that towards the end of the movie, and it's very cool. Like I said, Christina Ricci is great. What else can I say? She is fantastic. And like I said, they go for a very distinct look here. A very kind of 60s pop art vibe for a lot of the home stuff, a lot of the attire choices when they're at home, a lot of very, like I said,
there's no white
visuals,
walls in
no.
any building.
Absolutely not. There is a very deliberate, unique aesthetic that runs through this entire movie. We'll talk about that a little bit more with scenes, but like, nothing in this movie is plain. Nothing in this movie is simple. They go all out with everything, and her look and her character is no exception.
Shout out to Ariel Winter, who does play a young Trixie in those aforementioned flashbacks we talked about. Also doing a good job. And then we have Susan Sarandon as Mom Racer. Andrew, this is Speed Racer's mom, in case you were unaware.
What was the character's name again? I'm sorry.
Mom Racer.
Mom Racer. Oh, okay. From the German. Got it. Okay, perfect.
I love Susan Sarandon. Wonderful actor. I mean, it's almost like John Goodman. It's like, oh, of course she's great. She's great in everything she's in. Seen her in a million stuff. She's always kills it. And I wouldn't say she's gotten better with age. But she, in her later roles, later stage of her career, she's kind of gained this spunkiness, this cool grandma feel. This is kind of the beginning of that era of her career. But I love her showing up here. Unfortunately, I mean, Pops Racer gets some key scenes with the kiddos that I think really, I mean, it's why he's getting my Mark Strong Award. Mom Racer doesn't have those key scenes. I don't think. She's more in like ensemble scenes. But I love how involved she is, how supportive she is of the men in her life, that she's literally helping build the engine before the final race. Great stuff. But man, they really just swung for the fences with casting this role and getting Susan Sarandon.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think there is and she gets a couple of one-on-one scenes with Speed Racer that I actually really like. There's a couple of scenes where she's kind of talking to him directly, and I think they're done really, really well. But yeah, she's very much more part of the group dynamic. Doesn't get a lot of standout moments on her own. But yeah, she's doing a great job. She brings that exact right energy to the character. She's kind of in between. Like, the movie does have the tension between Pops and Speed for a great deal of the movie, and she's kind of that weird intermediary who's trying to like thread both sides of like letting Speed know that, you know, I don't entirely agree with how your dad feels and your feelings are valid, but at the same time, maybe you're being a little trying to, like I said, strike that balance between the two, and it's a tough space to sit, as anybody with a large family knows, and she does a great job with it. I mean, like I said, Susan Sarandon, she's a great actor. What more can be said?
Young Polly Litt plays Sprittle Racer. I love Sprittle. I love that it's clearly like it's the name of a little boy, but like that's his name. He's gonna be a grown ass man named Sprittle one day. What are you doing, Mom and Pops Racer? But
seriously, come on.
Here's what I'll say about this performance. This character, as well as their monkey pet, are just there for the kids in the audience. I mean, they are just there for just entertaining 5-year-olds. Okay? Like, I don't think there's any denying that. And what I'm going to say about his performance is it doesn't annoy me.
No.
It's not, I don't find it grating. I don't find it annoying.
Right.
Like, it's clearly aimed at an audience younger than me, but I think he's executing it well. I'll say that.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, kid characters in films are always they get a bad rap. I'm just going to say it. And like you said, he finds that they use him very effectively here to kind of augment certain scenes, enhance certain things, but don't overdo it to the point that it becomes grating. Paulie done a couple of things here and there, not a whole lot recently. Was apparently had bit parts in Jersey Girl, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind when he was even younger than he was here. Was part of the TV show Hope and Faith, and then later a couple episodes of Wizards of Waverly Place. So, I mean, a little bit all over the place, but also showed up in the film Doubt in 2008, which was that weird drama film that takes place at a Catholic elementary school that Meryl Streep was in with Philip Seymour Hoffman. It was a strange one. But yeah, it is a good performance. Like I said, doesn't look like he's doing too much more these days, but thumbs up for you, Paulie.
Kick Gurry plays Sparky, the family mechanic, always helping out Pops on the new race cars. And back on our Matrix month, we talked a lot about the writing of the Wachowskis, and one thing I was continuously shouting out is their ability to make minor characters and characters with minimal screen time feel unique, feel important, and feel like fully realized real characters. I think Sparky is a great example of that. not a lot of screen time. He's the mechanic. That's kind of all you really need to know about the character. But credit the Kick for bringing the performance to life and being charming and really good at this, like, gosh gee Willikers face. But also the writing for, like, giving him, like, just enough moments where, like, it justifies his character being here. Like, being included at the winner's circle at the end, or embracing Speed Racer before his final race because they're proud of the car. Like, these little moments that kind of give you some insight to the character and make the whole world feel more realized because of it. I think it's the strength of the Wachowskis' writing. And again, credit to Kit Gurry for bringing the character to life.
I agree. Like you said, it's just enough to make the character feel more than throwaway and give him a little bit of a sense of importance. I've seen Kick in a few things. Edge of Tomorrow was one that I'm a big fan of. Also shown up in some other Wachowski productions, Jupiter Ascending, Sense8. So definitely found his way into that circle as well. But yeah, this is like I said, it would have been real easy for this character to be a complete throwaway, and Kick makes sure that it's not.
Now, Andrew, this brings us to the person I was considering for the Mark Strong Award before going with John Goodman. So, John Goodman gets my Mark Strong Award, but that doesn't mean I think any less of this performance here. Matthew Fox as Racer X. Because, Andrew, this is a ridiculous role. They look ridiculous. The part they're playing is ridiculous. Racer X might be more silly than Speed Racer as a name, but Matthew Fox makes it cool. I think this guy is cool. He is Batman in a race car. He's out there fighting for justice, trying to change the game, trying to, upheave this oppressive system in the game of racing. He's got a costume much like Batman. There's this one race where, these cars do wild stuff. They jump and they flip and they have weapons. There's this car flipping over Racer X. They're upside down. And Racer X's car, he jumps his car off the ground just so he can reach up and punch the other guy in the face. He uses this super elaborate hydraulic thing to launch his car just to punch someone in the face. Andrew, Racer X is Batman, and I think it's very cool.
Yeah, this was Racer X is obviously a very important character from the television show, from the manga and everything. Definitely a recurring part of the mythos. They update his look here, and they make him look cool. And like you said, and for most of the movie, he's got his face covered. Like he's doing the dread. You just see his lower mouth. His lower face. But
the lower part of his mouth.
The lower lip is all you see. Not the upper lip. But yeah, it's easy to kind of get lost in the shuffle there. Apparently Keanu Reeves was also up for this at one point, or they asked him and he had to turn it down for whatever reason. Would have been cool to see. But yeah, like you said, he finds a way to take that role and make it cool.
And then we have Scott Porter as Rex Racer. And Andrew, look, spoilers here. This is the same character. They have some facial reconstruction surgery. We learn in like the last 45 seconds of the movie that they are indeed the same character, even though it's hinted at the entire time. But obviously played by different actors because physically they look different. So Scott Porter is playing the younger version of Rex Racer before his supposed demise. And I think Scott's doing a great job. It's kind of a shame he didn't get to play both sides of the character, even though, for the plot, I understand why. But I think he's great as the younger, rebellious, I think a little older than a teenager, but rebellious son who is trying to make a name for himself and strike out on his own and at odds with his dad and does what he thinks is right, even though it means sacrificing being able to be with his family. And now he's got to kind of watch after him from afar as Racer X. So it's definitely a tragic character. But the scenes with Scott Porter, like he's internalizing all that. The audience doesn't exactly know what his conflict is until much later, but it's clearly weighing heavily on him in his final days at the family home, talking with Pops or talking with Speed. And I think it's just done really well by Scott Porter, and a great older brother. I really like their dynamic. They truly love each other, look out for one another. Speed absolutely looks up to his older brother. It's not, they don't do the thing where like old brothers are always fighting and punching each other, but really love each other. They're more outward about how much they get along and look after each other, and I really like that about it too.
As do I. The chemistry with Nicholas Elia and Scott Porter was really good, and showed in those scenes they had together really, really well. But yeah, he's, like you said, he only gets to do the few scenes as Rex Racer. They do the facial reconstruction surgery for Racer X to make him look different. And then, like you said, in like the last 30 seconds, he reveals that he is Rex. I believe the cartoon ends with a similar revelation where like I think Speed like confronts him and he says no, and then Speed gets knocked out, and then he does reveal that he is Rex Racer, but Speed doesn't find out about it. So it's something the show always played coy about up until the very end as to whether or not Racer X was Rex Racer. And so they maintain that mystery here and kind of keep it going at the end. And yeah, it's unfortunate that Scott didn't get to do that part. I understand why, but what screen time Scott Porter does have, he makes the most out of.
Andrew, let's jump into it. Let's talk about the scenes of this movie, starting with our personal favorites and best scene of the film. So, Andrew, in your opinion, when is this movie firing on all cylinders? That line I use every episode finally makes sense. What is the best scene of Speed Racer?
I am going with during the, I guess, the Grand Prix qualifier. There is an extended sequence that takes place in the desert. And I think this is where the movie is kind of fully leaned into everything about the original concept. This is just a massively, almost wacky races-esque, like, cavalcade of insanity. Like, they're racing through. Everybody's got gadgets on their cars. Like, it's unbelievable, all the stuff that people are doing. They're flying through the air. They're jumping around. You've got Racer X, Speed, and whoever the other guy with them is. I can't remember his name. Tejo. All kind of battling against all these other racers through this big desert sandscape. I sent you a picture of it on my TV with my reactive lights, and you were like, man, I love Fury Road. It's definitely got a vibe there. I can't deny it. Even though this was 6 years before. But it's if it's a cartoon brought to life in any moment, I feel like this is really it, for me at least. Almost any racing sequence definitely feels like a cartoon because they kind of are cartoons. The races are shot on green screens. Everything else is created. Genuinely, like I said, it creates a unique visual style that stands out and is hard to compare to because almost nothing else is like it, especially at the time. You were starting to get green screen movies at the time, but not like this, not to this level. And this movie goes as hard as it can with it, and all of these racing sequences are prime examples of that. But this desert one in particular, I think, is my favorite. Like I said, just pure on. It's like I said, it almost felt like an episode of Wacky Races at times, where just all of this chicanery and gadgets and everything. I was just waiting for Pat Pending in his converter car, but it didn't quite happen. But just pure cartoon insanity in the best way. And like I said, you could apply this to almost every race sequence, but the desert one is the one that stands out in my head.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I really like the final race, but this is probably my favorite race of the film. And if you were to show someone, just one scene, one 15, 20-minute segment, this would be the one to show them. Like, look, watch this. If you're having fun with this, check the movie out. If you think this is ridiculous, don't bother with the other 2 hours, Like, this is really what this movie's all about. I mean, it's truly a cartoon brought to life, almost literally. I mean, the Wachowskis were very clearly trying to do whatever they could to, what does a live action anime look like? To the point where they do things like everything you see in the shot being in focus as if it was a cartoon, which a lot of movies giving you like this, I mean, I'll be honest, kind of an uneasy feeling at times. Something like you're like something feels off. I don't know exactly what it is, and that's because literally, visually, this is like nothing else. And whether or not it's like nothing else in a good way or in a bad way is for every person to decide for themselves. But like, this movie has a truly unique visual style. And I myself will admit that I'm a bit mixed on it ultimately, but during this kinetic, crazy racing, totally works. I really like before the race starts. I mean, they really set up that this is a race of like outlaws. Like, this is like a no holds barred race as opposed to the other regulated races that we'll see. And so before the race starts, the camera zooms in on all their different cars and gives you like an X-ray vision of the different missiles or, boxing glove on a spring or whatever these people have in their cars. Really like, Chekhov's gun, like really setting up like there's going to be some wacky stuff during this race. One of the first racers to try to take Speed Racer out ends up crashing into like this pillar and just explodes into colors. Just explodes into like various colors of smoke. Why? Honestly, just because it looks cool. I think that's really the only reason you can give to that. Kind of the story throughout this race is this is like the first instance of Speed Racer kind of having a bounty on his head. So throughout the race, they'll do a quick flashback to your Mark Strong Award winner, our villain, Mr. Royalton, paying off these racers. They'll do a flashback to him giving them gold or diamonds or fur or whatever whatever they're into, telling him to take out Speed Racer. So do a flashback. You'll see they get paid off. Then you go back to the race and you'll see them attempt to take out Speed Racer over and over again. And it's pretty rad. Just the imaginative stuff they come up with here is just off the walls and bonkers. And I really, talking about Speed Racer being like this possibly like a wholesome character, like I was trying to describe earlier, I love this earnest line. Have any of these drivers read the rule book? And then you have one of them like pull out their weapon. He goes, see, this race is full of cheaters. The innocence of the character is really fun.
I love that becomes like a thing throughout the movie where like everybody cheats, but they're doing it in like sneaky ways so that they don't get caught. I mean, we'll talk about it more later, but there's a big moment during the final race where like Speed manipulates that and uses it to his advantage, and it's just very, very, it's very, very funny for me personally. But yeah, this whole desert sequence for me that's where it really fires on all cylinders. It's just this particular race. They go all out. They create as many insane set pieces as they can, and brings the action to life. Like I said, in a way that like nothing else is. There's nothing else like this movie. I will say that 100%, like not backhanded anything. I don't think I've ever seen a movie like Speed Racer, and I don't know that I ever will again.
I agree with that. And I'm just looking through my notes here about this race. There's a line from this race specifically that I almost used in the intro, decided not to, but like his main rival in this race, there's a time when he looks in his rearview mirror and says, "Let's pinch these turds off." I don't want that to be like literally the first thing. I always imagine the podcast listener as listening to our podcast for the first time every episode. Like, what if Speed Racer is the first time someone tunes in, and that's the first thing they hear me say? So I decided against it, but just ridiculous. Yeah, it's a great race, and it's such a huge part of the movie because you have this big race through the desert, but it's like this race is like a series. Because that night, back at the hotel room, Speed Racer's family finds out that he entered this race against their wishes, and it is the race that his brother died at, so they do not want him involved, so they come and show up to his hotel, at first trying to get him to quit, but once they see that he's going to see it through, they come around to support him. But the attacks on Speed Racer aren't limited to the track, Andrew, and ninjas show up to take him out. And when I say ninjas, I mean a guy in a black gi and a mask over his face. I mean a movie ninja.
Yep.
who gets dispatched of by the whole family, but ultimately by Pops Racer, who just goes full like Zangief from Street Fighter on this guy, totally manhandles him, and you got this punch-in shot where we zoom into Pop's big ring, his wrestling championship ring that he still wears, as he spins the ninja over his head, and like ninja stars fly out and get stuck into the wall, as well as the guy's car keys fly out. It throws him out the window. So wonderful, so bonkers. When you alluded to earlier, when someone asks, "Was that a ninja?" He says, "More like a nanja."
Yep.
Terrible what passes for a ninja these days.
It was, yeah. It's
more like a nanja, Andrew.
Beautiful. I love that whole ninja fight sequence. It is fantastic.
Before I get too caught up in this sequence, though, and because there's like a whole second part to the race, and we'll talk about it. It's great, but I want to zoom in on my favorite scene really quickly here. I love these races. We're going to talk about all of them because they're truly some highlights of the film. But I want to get really specific with my favorite scene of the movie. It comes pretty early on. I talked about the scene where his older brother dies, or Rex Racer dies, and you see young Speed Racer crying, and we're kind of in this emotional state in the beginning of the movie. But Andrew, to be completely honest with you, all right, I'm going into this movie, I'm thinking about how everyone is saying, it's a masterpiece. People didn't get it at the time. It's ahead of, it's got this style, and I want to like it, obviously, hashtag PP. Like, I want to find some positives, but I really don't know what to expect. And this movie has a certain editing style. It's not the entire runtime, but through large chunks of it, that is, I've seen referred to as a stream of consciousness editing, where one scene kind of bleeds into the other and bleeds into a flashback and then turns into an animated scene, and audio from the next scene comes in, then we move there. Just very, well, like stream of consciousness, right? And I am not a fan of this editing style. Let me put it that way. Andrew, we talked about this off mic recently, but I was on an airplane recently, and Elvis was one of the movies on the airplane, so I decided I'd watch that. I had never seen it, didn't see it in theaters. I made it about an hour into the movie and had to turn it off because the entire movie, at least all that I saw, was this exhausting editing style that I am just personally not a fan of. And I'll just, put as black and white as I can and say that. So I'm not too enthusiastic the first few minutes of this movie is what I'm saying. There's some stuff that I like, but like this editing style, I find it so exhausting. But there's this moment that pops up that really grounds the movie and pulls me in. A big thing I don't like about this editing style is I feel like nothing has any weight to it and feels important because we're just flowing to the next scene. But there's this moment where they're in the sadness of Rex Racer dying. And Speed is talking about this night that his dad was staying up watching old races. And Speed goes and joins him on the couch. And we see the scene playing out as Speed is talking about it. And they're just sitting there on the couch. This old race is playing on the TV. And then suddenly Pops gets into it. And he starts yelling at the TV and chanting and getting into it and cheering him on. And Speed starts cheering him on alongside it. And they are just bonding over their passion of racing. They find this passion again, this bond, this sort of reason to get back into life, to not move on from the loss of the family member, but to live again. And it's just, this scene probably plays out in 3 minutes. It's not very long.
Yep.
But it's obvious why it's important in the story. But I think it's totally effective. Like, as a viewer watching the movie, I'm totally bought in to this very sweet moment between a father and son. We've given credit to the actors for bringing these performances to life, but it's just so well done and it works. And it comes early in the movie. I'm like, okay, if that scene can land, if that scene can work, I think this movie can work. I think something can happen here because, again, the editing had me a bit worried, but it slowed down for that moment. The scene totally lands. father-son stuff in general just always gets me in movies, but this one in particular I think is just so well done. I love that scene. It's super sweet. And I'm going to say it's my favorite scene in the movie.
Great pick. No notes.
So back to this race, Andrew. There's a second.
No, that is a great pick for the scene, Chris. Like you said, the editing style is certainly not for everyone. I agree. I'm also not a huge fan of it, which is also why I never finished Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce. But it is this one lands and it works really, really well. So I agree.
But seriously, back to the race. The race we were talking about earlier. There's the scene in the hotel room, but then there's like the second day of the race where it continues, I guess, on like a new track. The rules, I'll be honest, not always very clear to me. Maybe I missed it, but how exactly these races and rankings work, I'm not too sure. But the important thing is we're back on a track again, and that's where some really fun stuff happens. This second day is all through like an icy landscape and these ice tunnels, and man, God, visually, this movie does such cool stuff. We get like the Akira style tail lights a lot where they kind of streak across the screen.
Yeah.
But especially when they're in this ice tunnel, like all the lights streaking, it looks so rad. And I love this. This movie just is not afraid to get bonkers. Speed Racer gets driven off the track, like the side of a mountain, is like falling to his death, it looks like.
Yeah.
Until he activates the spikes in his tires and digs into the mountain and jumps to the other side of the mountain and drives up the ice mountain to get back onto the track. It's just so wild. And
it's awesome.
Like you said, the entire movie is shot on green screen. It had to be. I mean, I'm not sure what you could do practically. If you want the movie to look like this, to have these kind of scenes, man, that was the only way to go. And movies shot entirely on green screen are the ones that I just kind of hit or miss for me. Sin City, great, perfect. Of course, you had to shoot those movies that way for that visual style. I think the more you lean into the visual style, the more you quote unquote justify the green screen. Sky Captain: The World of Tomorrow, I like that movie for similar reasons. It builds a world where you couldn't have shot it practically, you know? And I think Speed Racer falls into that camp. I think these just wacky, absurd, ignoring physics races. I mean, it's the only way you could have done it. And they pull it off. I mean, it's totally worth it just to have moments like this.
Absolutely. I agree completely. These races are where they really, like I said, they take this and stretch it as far as they possibly can. And I would not go as far as to say the technology is not there. I just think the visual aspect is not necessarily going to be for everyone. It is very, very frenetically paced, especially when they're on like racetracks. It is these landscape sequences work a little bit better because the background is much calmer. The focus is all on the cars and the car's insanity. But the landscape is relatively unchanged. When they're in the actual like racetracks, it's 9,000 miles an hour. You've got the cars changing, you've got the backgrounds changing, you've got the bright lights, you've got this insane frenetic pace that can be difficult to keep up with. And I'm not going to fault the movie for that. It's absolutely a deliberate choice. I can't imagine the Wachowskis wanted it any other way. They were trying to bring that energy to the races, and I do think that is successful. But these landscape races, for sure, landscaper, I guess, terrain, all-terrain segments, that's where there's like some real, I think, creativity and really stretching of these ideas going on, and I think it all works really, really well. It makes the scenes memorable. Cool stuff happens. It's just cool. Like, at the end of the day, like, that's what it is. You're watching these cars do insanely ridiculous things the cars can't do. But, you know, who changes the tires on Speed Racer's car? No one, because it's not a real car. And they change themselves, as the movie explains. But it's a blast. I do love all of these sequences. Like I said, this is, I guess, like the qualifying race to get into the Grand Prix, and it is wild. They go to every single length possible. They actually do stress at one point during this ice sequence that there is a blind spot in the race where there's no cameras. So that's kind of the weird thing is for a lot of this race, there's these cameras because you've got like commentating on the races in real time. And so all of the weird devices and things are either flying openly in the face of that in a case where a race is kind of being broadcast or there's no rules like that versus like the final race where they have to be all secretive about it. They can't just reveal it. And yeah, that ice race where there's a blind spot and then there's actually like a physical fight that everybody gets to get in on. And it's a blast. Like I said, the action is a little bit easier to follow, I think, with this, especially the ice sequence. So for me, I was able to kind of really appreciate what was happening here. And it's a blast. You got more John Goodman fighting people, and I'm never going to have a problem with that, man. He doesn't do that enough.
Listening to the Wachowskis talk about kind of their inspirations and goals of this film makes a lot of the visuals start to make sense. They talked a lot about how other art forms can have a much wider variety in approaches and style. You know, painting has cubism and abstract art and different methods and forms, and they can all go side by side in a museum. They can go appreciate every one of them. But when it comes to film, they said it's much more structured. Every movie you make is fitting under this same basic box and 3x structure and editing style. And they wanted to question, well, what are the other styles of filmmaking that you could do that people just aren't doing? You want to push those bounds. And they felt Speed Racer was the appropriate movie to push those limits because it's ostensibly a movie for kids, and kids aren't going to care about the quote-unquote rules of cinema and editing style. They're not going to care when one scene bleeds into another, or when a character's talking head slides across the scene and that's how we change scenes. Like, the kids don't know what it quote-unquote should be, and they would be much more accepting of new styles. So when you have all that in mind, it makes sense that this movie feels like a sugar rush, like a kid just, ate an entire pack of Fun Dip, right? Just ignored the stick and just poured it straight into their mouth. And then this is their imagination at the time. Just these bright colors, quick transitions, and utterly bonkers action. It makes sense. Now, obviously, children aren't the only people watching this movie. Adults are watching it as well. And I think it's where you get this wild reception where some people are like, it's like you're on board with it or you're not. Everyone recognizes they're doing something different. Does it land for you or not? It's hard. It really, you can never be objective about any art, but this one in particular, you could tell me, dude, that movie's a masterpiece. People are wrong about it. But yeah, man, I totally see that. Or you could tell me that movie is awful. It gave me a headache. I'm like, yep, I kind of understand that part too. You know?
I agree completely. Like I said, I'm never gonna fault somebody for swinging for the fences, and I think that's definitely what the Wachowskis do here. This is not The Matrix. It is arguably even more visually complex and complicated than The Matrix ever was. There's practical sets in The Matrix. There's a lot of CG. In this movie, I don't know that there's any practical sets. I think everything's a green screen. And it creates a wholly unique experience. And like I said, I will never, ever fault a director, a writer for ever swinging for the fences. And I would say the Wachowskis 100% swung for the fences here. And what I will say is, I think their vision is wholly realized and complete with this movie. I believe 100% this movie is the movie they wanted to present Speed Racer as. Like you said, ultimately how you feel about that movie is a different thing. But I do believe it is exactly what it is supposed to be. And I think the reason that it has a cult following is because that lands for a lot of people. It is, like I said, I remember taking classes in college with film professors that were talking about the 180 degree rule and you can't, if you're shooting a conversation, you can't show both people from the same angle because then it becomes confusing. People can't follow it, and it's that whole that lesson of the line across a scene where you can't cross it because that makes it confusing. And then you start watching movies and you realize people break that rule all the time. You suddenly realize that, it's there's a song by Daft Punk on Random Access Memories that has Giorgio Moroder on it, and it kind of starts with this like monologue he gives about his life, and just a strange choice for a Daft Punk song. But in that intro, he kind of talks about how he got into music and how he went about kind of building what he wanted to do, and he mentions that a big turning point for him was dispensing with the notion of how to correctly write music. I took like musicology and music theory in college. Musicology being a real thing and not just a Prince album. It is musicology is more listening. That's how you learn by ears, the musicology classes. But you were told, like, if you use the third chord, it has to be followed by these chords. And then so it was this process where, like, if you were trying to write something, they were trying to tell you how to musically write it correctly, and figure that out. And it's a very strange thing to kind of wrap your head around, because the idea is that it would be like sonically pleasing, or like it would fit within the notes of the chord, or all these different things. But then you will listen to music, or you'll be learning a song, and you realize that nobody did that. There's tons of popular songs where they're not playing by those rules, and you start to think the whole thing's a scam, Chris, and then you realize you're thousands of dollars deep into debt, and all you have are lessons that nobody in the professional industries follows. Anyway, folks, what I'm saying is be creative. And if it doesn't, if you get told it's not supposed to work that way, that doesn't mean it won't work that way. Go for it.
The Wachowskis certainly go for it. I mean, I agree with what you're saying. Certainly rules are meant to be broken approach in this movie. The races are great. We still got to talk about the final race, but I do want to shout out, I talked about the father-son dynamic being the heart of this movie and what really centers it, and some of my favorite scenes. And I love this scene where Speed Racer's walking out of the house. It mirrors a scene we saw earlier where Rex Racer is leaving home, and it's the last time he sees his family before he passes away. He gets into it with Pops Racer, and he storms out the door. Speed Racer is doing the same thing. He now feels lost. He's trying to go out on his own and kind of figure things out, and he's walking out the door, and it's like the exact same scene. Pops Racer is sitting at the bar in the dark, like, Dad is always there ready when the son's about to walk out, and he stops him and he says, "Well, I'm not going to stop you, tell you not to leave. I just want to talk to you before you walk out," which he did not do with the Rex Racer, and
right.
He says as much. And ultimately what he tells him is that door is always open. You could always come back because I love you. And he's doing what he did not do with Rex. And you can tell he's regretted it every single day. And he's grown as a father, and he is trying to do better and connect with his son and say the things he couldn't have said before. And it totally lands, and it's wild. We're talking about these racing scenes with the jumping cars and the missiles and driving up the walls. And then you have this emotional father-son scene that lands and tracks and works. And these scenes are so important in this movie to give it some kind of, something's got to ground this bonkers movie. And for me, it's the father-son stuff. And that scene in particular, I find very touching. And a big Hollywood blockbuster movie, and a dad is telling his son, like, I love you. Like, it's good stuff. It'll always going to work for me.
100%. I think that in particular is great. Like you said, you can see that, and you can see that some of the tension that Pops and Speed has is over the fact that he's got that kind of unresolved guilt over what happened with Rex. If only Rex were still alive, Chris, and could tell him that it's okay. But no.
That's the tragedy. He can't do it, Andrew.
Because Rex Racer is a selfish man. No, I do love this scene. Like you said, you can tell that it's Pop's kind of trying to go back and fix the mistake he made at the offset of throwing his son out over racing. Like he says, he's like, over a company, over cars. He's like, he's basically like, I disowned my son over cars. He's like, how? He's like, that's like he says, in short, it's the dumbest thing I could have done. And he doesn't want to do that again. And so I love seeing character growth like that. John Goodman, obviously a powerhouse to deliver all of it. And it really works.
And then our final race of the movie, Andrew, is we got to touch on it. It's not the longest race in the movie. I think it's one of the shorter ones, actually. But story-wise, I mean, I'm so invested going into this final race. Like, how is this actually going to go down? And it's really good. A few very specific things I want to shout out, though. The very beginning of the race, like, the flag goes out, the cars take off. They're driving by this wall on the track, and on the wall is pictures of a zebra. And every other picture, the black and white reverses, and the pictures are, it's like frames of a horse running. So as they drive past it really fast, it looks like the zebra is running with the alternating black and white colors. It visually is one of the coolest things I've ever seen in my life. I mean, not to be too hyperbolic there, but like it's visually it just looks rad, and it's just a cool way to show speed, like show them driving fast. Like aesthetically, this final race is just like all out. There's this scene where Speed, like, I don't know if I should call it drifting, because their tires, like, all four tires turn around every corner. It's very strange, but it's sliding. His Mach 6 is sliding around a turn, and as he goes across the track, all the colors melt. Like, he bleeds the colors of the track, like they're watercolor as he goes across it. And again, like physically, that doesn't make any sense. Like, what is happening there? Is he melting paint? I don't know. Visually, looks rad as hell. I mean, the movie is just going all out at this point. I don't know, but I like it. It's great. Of course, he wins the big race, and it's not just our good guy coming in first place. Like the plot has built in a lot to the meaning of him winning, and like him bringing down this evil empire basically with his big win at the end there. And it's great. It's a thrilling finish to the movie.
It is. We get the big moment where like his car kind of breaks down, and he remembers what Racer X kind of told him, which is like, you know, you have to find that thing that you're racing for, and you have to talk to the car. And so like, you know, he's like, what do you need me to do? What do you need? And he's like, hold on. So he kind of finally like slows down a little bit and works with the car, and he kind of finds his thing. And like I said, all this lands really well. He gets the big win. We do find out at this point that Racer X is indeed Rex Racer. Just took his last name as his first name, I guess.
Yeah, but it should be X Racer, right? Like he loses Rex, replaces it with X Racer, and then he just flips it.
But he's not an X Racer because he still races. But folks, you can see we're so funny. They gave us our own show. But I do love all this. The final kind of stretch where he kind of overcomes the other people he's racing, I think that works really, really well. It's one of the moments, like you said, where that stream of consciousness, I think, really does work in the movie's favor. I do love the sequence. I alluded to it before. At one point in the race, he kind of gets, I forget what they call it, but this dude like throws like a grappling hook like under Speed's car. Steve Racer. He like throws this grappling hook up under Speed's car, and they're like stuck together, but I guess people don't know that. So what Speed does, not Steve, Speed, he like angles the cars so that the bottom of the car showing the cheating is exposed to the cameras, and they all slow it down and they see it, and it's this like potential Hall of Fame racer that did it, and everybody's like aghast. They're like, and it's being clever, it's being creative, it's Speed thinking on his feet or on his wheels, however you want to do it. And it's all these little things. Like you said, it's him combating this kind of the underhanded nature of it. And like you said, the thing is at the end of it, Inspector Detector or Detective Inspector, whatever his name is, a character we've not mentioned at all to this point, but Inspector Detector, head of the corporate crimes division, who's investigating people like Royalton for rigging races and things like that. He tells Racer X, he's like, he's going to change racing. And Racer X says, he already has. Finn.
And then the movie ends, and we go to credits where we get to see Chim Chim dancing. That's the last thing. And Andrew, he's wearing pajamas. And on Chim Chim's pajamas are pictures of like a little human, like a little boy. Because like a little kid might wear pajamas with a monkey on it. His is like humans on it.
I get it.
That's the last note that I took on this movie.
It ain't making me laugh, but I get it.
Man, what a ride this movie is. I'm glad that I've seen it. I don't hate it. I can't tell you honestly where I'd land on it ultimately, but there's a lot of things I appreciate. Hashtag PP. A lot of positives, a lot of big takeaways. Yeah. My respect for the Wachowskis as filmmakers only grows with each installment of their filmography that I see, this movie being no exception. I don't see this movie as being one that I'm going to watch every other month, but I would certainly watch it again.
I agree. It is at bare minimum a deeply unique experience. That I could keep saying that, but it really is. It's a movie that's, like I said, I say this with all praise intended. I have never seen a movie like Speed Racer. Like, you think about something like Mad Max Fury Road being an easy comparison about a movie that features cars doing insane things, right? It's a completely different experience. They're nothing alike. They are absolutely nothing alike. And Speed Racer is, like I said, at bare minimum, it is a fully formed vision that is executed, I can only assume, exactly as intended. And if that works for you, fantastic. It is unlike anything else. That is what I can say about it for sure. It has got visuals that are so far ahead of the curve in a lot of ways that, I mean, this movie's doing things that movies still aren't doing now, really, for the most part. And there's something to be said for the just pure auspiciousness of going there and pulling it off.
Andrew, there is just 1 week left of our, what are we calling this? Live action adaptations of a cartoon month. Next week, we'll be talking about Scooby-Doo, the Freddie Prinze Jr. Scooby-Doo film.
Yes.
The first one. A movie I've definitely seen before a number of times. It's been a minute. I'm excited to go back to it. But kind of looking back on this whole month, like, other than Casper, these are all cartoons from the 60s, I think.
Yeah.
Casper's a little bit older than that, but...
Yeah, I mean, they are. It's Flintstones, Casper, Scooby-Doo, Speed Racer. What was the other
George of the Jungle?
Yeah. Yeah. Chris, it was 60s cartoon adaptation month, and we didn't even know it.
Yeah. And all these movies, like, most of these are from the 90s, but, Scooby-Doo and Speed Racer are from the 2000s. What do we call that first decade? What do you call the first decade of the 2000s, Andrew?
The aughts.
The aughts? Well, they're from the aughts. That sounds weird, but I'll go with it.
That's what I've heard.
Well, before we talk about Scooby-Doo, our final episode of the month, it's time for our question of the week. If you want to leave a question for a future episode, you can just hop into our Discord. There's a link right there in the show notes. This week, the question comes from that guy in Doom who asks, what director do you think has the widest spread of genres, and recognizable films. Okay. I like the little qualifier there because it's not just a wide spread of genres, but recognize they've got to be hits. They can be well-known movies in different genres, but coming from the same director. I mean, someone's popping into my mind like right away. Andrew, do you have someone in mind?
Me too. Yeah, I saw like the minute I read this question, I know what my gut answer is.
Okay, on 3. 1, 2, 3. Steven Spielberg. Okay. Yeah. I think. I mean,
I can't think of anybody that's on his level because, like, you think about just what he's known for. Jaws is a horror movie, basically. Act, whatever you want to call it, but Jaws is definitely playing on the horror theme. So, like Indiana Jones series, all just adventure, classic adventure movies. You got something like E.T., science fiction, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, also sci-fi. You've got Schindler's List, just like a straight period drama. You've got Saving Private Ryan. You've got like just
Amistad, The Color Purple. I mean,
Amistad, The Color Purple. I mean, like I'm really trying to tone in on like the well-known, super popular ones. But even just doing that, it's Indiana Jones, Jaws, Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan, E.T., and those are like every single one of them is a different genre. Like every single one of them. And so I think, and he's still out there. Like he's still doing stuff like The Post, which is a period drama about, it's one of a classic newspaper movie. You've got even like Ready Player One, another big, kind of comedy sci-fi thing. Like he doesn't stop. He does whatever he wants, and I love him for it. But I can't think of anyone else with the longevity and the scope that he has. Like somebody like Martin Scorsese comes to mind, but I don't think
that's the other one I was thinking of. I still put Steven Spielberg above for this question. Yeah. But Martin Scorsese, he's known for his gangster movies, but you've also got The Aviator, Shutter Island, Wolf of Wall Street. I mean, these don't fit into the Goodfellas casino type movies.
Casino type stuff.
I still don't think it's as wide of a gamut though, as we were just talking about with Spielberg.
No, not with Spielberg. Absolutely not. He's because I'm just trying to think of like long-term directors that never really stop, because there's actually not that many, and that are kind of still around. Like Spielberg is still out there making movies, and Scorsese is still out there making movies, and it creates this kind of insane body of work over the course of almost 50 years for both of them, where there's I mean, even with Scorsese stuff like Hugo, the Rolling Stones concert movie he randomly did. Like, I love David Lynch. His movies are all in the same genre. Confused as hell. It's the only one he's got that's not like that is Straight Story, which is just a straight road movie. I love that David Lynch made a non-confusing movie that's literally called The Straight Story. And even he did a concert movie with Duran Duran, but like he still hasn't made that many movies. But like Spielberg is just an insane list of stuff. I'm trying to think of like Francis Ford Coppola, not a whole lot of genres, and he also kind of stopped making things at a certain point.
What about the Coen brothers? Because like a Coen brothers movie feels like a Coen brothers movie, but I don't think The Big Lebowski is anything like No Country for Old Men. Like that's not the same
Blood
genre.
Simple or whatever. Yeah, I would say the Coen brothers are up there. I think the thing that you would run into with the Coen brothers is just like, I guess, visibility.
Yeah.
Like you watch like Raising Arizona and Blood Simple, and then like Fargo, and then like The Big Lebowski, and then No Country for Old Men, and like Inside Llewyn Davis, Llewellyn Davis. Sorry, you're getting a wide variety of things there. Some which are just straight comedies, like Raising Arizona or Big Lebowski, which have some dramatic elements, but by and large played for laughs mostly. Something like Fargo, which definitely has laughs, but then has this like grisly underbelly to it, or something like Blood Simple or No Country for Old Men that are just like straight dramas. Like they do go all out, and I think I just don't think they like clearly have like the visibility that Spielberg classics do, but I do think it's a good answer. Great answer, Chris.
Thank you. It wasn't on the board. No points. I don't think we're gonna top Spielberg. I mean, I think that's just
I
that's
can't
just the
think
answer
of-
to this. Because like Christopher
Yeah.
Nolan's working on a pretty long career at this point, but they all feel like Christopher Nolan movies. Quentin Tarantino is basically a genre unto itself because he's got
Right.
so many
It's-
similarities in his movies. I mean, I don't think anyone's covering the spread like Spielberg. That's be my final answer.
I think, yeah, I'm trying to think of anybody else off the top of my head that just like I said, the longevity of Spielberg alone. Like even the Coen brothers come in the late 80s, and Spielberg is like the mid 70s, and Scorsese even the late 60s. So I mean, I think the only other person that's maybe coming to mind, he struggles as well with the visibility factor, but would be Richard Donner. Just because Richard Donner has things like Superman. He has things like The Omen. You've got I just completely blanked on everything else the man has ever done. So you've
I mean,
got,
so far so good because The Omen's
You got The
nothing like
Omen.
Superman.
you got Superman, you've got The Goonies, you've got Lethal Weapon, you've got things like 16 Blocks, you've got like Conspiracy Theory. So like he does not have the identifiability of a lot of things, like certainly not to the level of Spielberg. And then, like I said, you look at like the Twilight Zone episodes that Richard Donner did. Like there's quite a spread in the things and the genres that he's worked in, but he definitely doesn't have the visibility that Spielberg's classics do. But alone from The Omen, Superman, The Goonies, Lethal Weapon, that's a pretty wide gamut there alone. Not definitely to the level of Spielberg though, but I just wanted to mention Richard Donner. So yeah, Spielberg, final answer.
Well, hey, you got a better answer? Can you think of a director that is working in as many different genres as Spielberg, but also at such a high level, a recognizable level of film? I can't think of somebody, but if you can, let us know. We want to hear about it. Hit us up on social media, jump into that Discord that I mentioned earlier, join the conversation, and come back next week for Scooby-Doo, our final episode in live action cartoon adaptation month. And until then,
From the 60s.
of the 60s. Until then, just remember that maybe not every movie is great.
But all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. You can follow him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. And thanks to Mitch for the music. Check him out on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy. And check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. Check out our store on TeePublic for some Best of the Rest merch. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. That is the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.